Thank you very much. So I was making the comment earlier when I put this on, it kind of reminded me of when I took the dog to the vet and he had a little cone around his head and it's like, oh yeah, I know what that's like now. I want to thank you for inviting me here today. Actually, that's not accurate. I called Bill and said, I'd like to speak there sometime. And he said, okay, I've got an opening in September. So thank you for having me is really what I should say. I'd like to read a poem first off. It's a Rumi poem, and you've probably heard it if you've read any Rumi, but it seemed appropriate for the topic today about a crazy world and how not to get too crazy yourself living in it. It's called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. As you know, yesterday was 20 years since I guess you couldn't call it bombings, but it was using a jet as a bomb for the Trade Center towers at World Trade Center in New York City and also Washington, D.C. And hearing it and watching it on the news, I felt the same feelings that I had 20 years ago. And most of that was just absolute disbelief that this could be happening. And then farther from that, thinking about what did we do? What did we do to cause this? Why are we the targets of this? And there's no easy answer to that. There were some people who said, well, we had been dabbling in other people's business for so long, they finally got us back. Some said that. Others said, that it was just a religious war. And so the truth, we'll probably never know what those people really were thinking or intending, but we do know what happened. And we know that they did that supposedly in the name of their religion. I've known some Muslim folks, and that was not part of their religion. But what happened is all of a sudden, they were the enemy. All Muslims were the enemy because of this, and because we didn't really know how to deal with our feelings around it. And a lot of people needed to blame someone, then it kind of got twisted. Now that we have an influx of refugees from Afghanistan, we're having to deal with having more Muslims in our country. And for some people, that's really hard. And it's hard to remember that these folks are innocents for the most part. I don't think that they would have been complicit in what happened in New York 20 years ago. But still, there are grudges being held, and there's suspicion. And so the world has gotten just a little crazier. I mean, it was crazy enough before this happened. The world's always been crazy. There have always been religious wars, the war to find out who gets to choose what God is. That's been going on for centuries and centuries. We've also had to deal within the past 20 years, come to a reckoning about what we've done to the environment. And this pretty much has been the entire globe, but not really not the industrialized companies who haven't really contributed so much to global warming, but they're being affected too. It's kind of like a little kid who's pooped in his diapers and now he has to walk around with that mess in his drawers. And so we're trying to figure out, oh, what are we going to do about this mess that we've created? I don't know if you remember this, but there was a cartoon called Pogo in the newspaper. Pogo was a possum who lived in the Okefenokee swamp. I like Pogo because I grew up in the Okefenokee swamp too. But Pogo was walking around through the swamp with his little comrade, and he was going, oh gosh, this is just terrible. This is awful. Ouch, ouch, boy. So he was walking through there and he just makes the comment. He said, we have seen the enemy and it is us. And so the next frame in the cartoon shows them walking on all this litter and debris that people have thrown away and discarded. So he was making a really clear point. This was in 1970 that he did this in the cartoon. And he was making the point that we are always doing things like this to ourselves. You know, we've been very careless with the environment because we thought it would last forever, that this wouldn't have an effect. And so now we're seeing climate change in an extreme. You know, the storms are getting stronger. They're getting more frequent. And so the planet is heating up. I mean, it's really hard for even the strongest denier to see that this is not happening. I think the last debate with my brother-in-law, who in the beginning was, there's no global warming. And then he got to where he could say, well, it's climate change. He could say that. And now it's getting so hard to say, we're not really causing it, which used to be his line that he stuck to. So we're not causing this, is just natural. This happens periodically. But now even the strongest denier like him can no longer say, oh, we're not doing this. How crazy is that? It's easy to point the finger at somebody else who's doing something crazy, but we collectively have done this. They're saying now that we only have a brief amount of time to correct it, to start going in the other direction. And if we don't do that, then it'll continue regardless of what actions we take. There was a little woman called Peace Pilgrim. She called herself that. I don't know if you ever heard of her or not, but in 1953, I think it was, she started walking at the Rose Bowl parade in California. And she said, I'm going to walk and I'm going to keep walking until there are no more wars. And she did. She walked until she died in her, I guess, it was young to me, early 60s. And she went around the country and she became sort of famous. At first, she was an oddity. She wore this little tunic that had pockets in it. All she carried with her was a pencil, some postage stamps, and no money. If people gave her money, she gave it away. She'd give it to churches that would invite her to come in and speak as she was walking through town. And so she only had one sermon that she gave, one talk, the only thing she ever told anybody. She said, if you want to have peace in the world, you have to have peace within yourself first, or it's not going to happen. She didn't go into detail as to how exactly we were to pull that off. But she did make the point that if we want to be peaceful, we have to act peaceful. If we want other people to be peaceful, we have to act peaceful toward them. It's hard for me sometimes when I see what happened at the Capitol on December 6th. You know, if there's any humor to be found in that attack on the Capitol, it was that most of those people were dressed up like the old members of the Village People. I looked at that on TV and I said, I can't believe this. The Village People are attacking Washington. It's crazy. And our former president called it a love fest. And so I'm thinking, why do people see this so differently? How can we have such totally different views of the same thing? You know, for some people, it was like the most patriotic thing that somebody could do was to attack Washington. And for me, my thought was, how can they get away with this? How could they have been encouraged to do this? What kind of consequences will they get, if any? That remains to be seen. I could go on with different examples of how our world has gotten crazier and crazier, but I want to remind myself and you, the world has always been crazy. Remember, they used to burn people because they thought they were witches. That's pretty crazy. Hitler had this romantic notion that the Aryan race were somehow German descendants. And he said about killing anybody who was not what he thought was an Aryan. In his own country, the people were divided. Some were going, well, you know, it's right. Germany really does have a destiny to be the greatest in the world, and we could lead the whole world. And then there were others who were going, my God, what's happened to our country? The ones who could get out and wanted to, tried to, some didn't. But they rounded up a lot of people. You know who they were. We don't really have to name them, but the Jews by far were the most victims of this Holocaust, but also handicapped people, gypsies, gay folks, sometimes women who talk too much, activists against the regime certainly got toasted. That's a pretty dark time in our country, I mean, in our world. But things like this happen all over the place. If you look at the Amazon forest, what's happening there, it's hard to really not get depressed. So we do have some advice from the past, from great teachers. And I'm going to talk about two of them just really quickly. One of them is Jesus, and the other one is Siddhartha Gautama, who was the Buddha. So I think we owe both of them. The world owes them a great big apology, because what has happened is they had these wonderful, easy to understand teachings that they came to the world to give. And basically what Jesus said, if you want peace, both internally and in your country, all you have to do is to share everything you've got with people who don't have much. Take care of people who are sick and feed people who are hungry. That was really the basic teaching that Jesus had. Well, 200 or 300 years later, at the Council of Nicaea, they were voting on whether Jesus was God or not. All he wanted, and he had to do this in the framework of the culture within which he lived. His basic religion of the day was the Hebrew religion. And so, born that way himself, he taught the people around him in that particular culture. But he didn't stop at that. He included anybody, really, pagans, Gentiles, lepers, prostitutes, tax collectors, for Pete's sake. He wanted to include them all, even their enemies. And he said, all you have to do is to feed them if they're hungry, take them in if they're homeless, and love them unconditionally. Well, it was a harder task than he knew. Maybe Mother Teresa pulled that off, but so few of the rest of us have done it. It takes what a leap of faith to really do that, to step away from your life as it is and serve other people. But now we've complicated his teachings to the degree that they're almost not recognizable anymore. Modern Christianity is more a story about Jesus than about his teachings. So people are fighting over it, what they think he meant when he said this. Thomas Jefferson one time wrote a book. I don't know if you're aware of this, but he waited until he was out of politics and was just home on the farm. But he wrote a book that's become known as the Jefferson Bible. And what he did is he went through the New Testament, what people these days call the Christian Bible. He went through the New Testament and he picked out what he thought Jesus really said and sort of put the rest aside. And he called it Separating the Diamonds from the Dung Heap. You can see why he waited till he retired to really put this in print. He got in a heap of trouble even after that. But what he was trying to do is to make a point that we've lost the teachings of Jesus. Here's what he thought they were in a concise little book that you can still buy these days, the Jefferson Bible. It's really interesting. In the first part of the book, there's a chapter or two on why he felt the need to write it, to do this. And then the last part of the book are the verses that he included in the book that he thought Jesus really said. The other person to whom we owe a pretty big apology is Siddhartha, the Buddha. He was about 600 years ahead of Jesus, time-wise. You probably know his story. He was born in a wealthy family, had more money than they knew what to do with. They had any kind of luxury that you could think of. But the story, the myth behind his birth was that these sages told his father, who was a prince, maybe a king, that your son is destined to be famous and great. And he's either going to be a great leader in your country, a great king, or he's going to be a preacher. So Dad was not happy to hear the last part. So he protected his son. He kept him sort of in the compound until he was, I don't know, maybe in his late teens or early 20s. He ended up getting married and having a son. He had everything you could think of. And one day, he went out with his chariot driver out into the towns in the surrounding area in India where he grew up. And he saw a sick person laying by the side of the road, and he asked the chariot driver, "What's wrong with that guy?" And he said, "He's sick. People get sick." And he was just sort of shocked. Went a little farther, or maybe on a next trip out, they saw somebody getting cremated. And in India, they have these funeral pyres. They'll have these racks, and they'll put the people on top and the fire below, and they burn them. Again, he was shocked. He said, "Why are they doing that?" And they said, "Well, he's dead. People die." And until then, believe it or not, according to the story, Siddhartha didn't really realize that that's what happened to people. They grow old, they get sick, they die. And so he decided he wanted to find out why all this suffering is taking place. What is the meaning of life if it's going to be like this, that people always meet the same end? So in India, it was popular then, and it's still popular now, to wander as a mystic through the country and not have anything and sort of starve yourself. And, through this, you would find enlightenment. Siddhartha tried that and he didn't find enlightenment. What he found was that he was killing himself by getting too skinny. And he had an epiphany. And this young peasant girl gave him a bowl of rice. And he realized what he was doing to himself. And so he ate the bowl of rice. Some of his pals that were his his peeps, were also starving themselves, trying to find enlightenment through this. And they sort of disowned him. They said, "Oh, you've turned back to luxury," as if a bowl of rice was luxury. So he ate the rice, and then he said, I'm going to meditate under that tree, and I'm not going to get up until I find the meaning of life. I want to know the truth about life. And he sat there for a number of days, and he did attain a reality about life. And what he discovered is this, and this is the lesson that he brought to the world. He said, in order for us to have peace within, we have to give up desires, we have to give up anger, and we have to quit making up stories about what's happening to us in life. Now, the third one, he called it being deluded. But when I first came across this part of his teaching, they would say deluded, deluded, deluded. And I thought that meant crazy. People were crazy. But what he was talking about actually as it's human nature for us that if we don't know the answer to something, we'll sort of make up a story about it. We'll call them theories. How's that? They're a theory. But really what we're doing is we're making up information that we don't have. And Siddhartha then had a name for that. It's called papancha. They have a name in Buddhism for that activity. And so I'll give you an example of it, how I do it in everyday life. I'll go to the post office. It's 1 minute past closing time, and sure enough, they're closed. And I go, I bet they closed early. All right, so there it is, the first thing I'm making up about this. Because I was here, I probably pulled up before they were actually closed, and I saw the close sign on the door, they closed early. Somebody stands you up for an appointment, and you're gonna go, oh, did they forget? I bet they did, they forgot. Gosh, I hope they weren't in a wreck. And so we do this little thing. When we're best at it? 3 o'clock in the morning. Wake up in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning and you've got an urgent concern. We could even call it worry. And so then we start making up stories. Oh, what's going to happen? Whatever shall become of me, over this 3 o'clock in the morning thing. So that's what Siddhartha was talking about when he said that people delude themselves. Because not only do we make up these stories, we believe them too. Now that's crazy. Who doesn't do that? And we keep this little inner dialogue in our head, sometimes just going all the time. We don't realize the importance of giving our brains a rest, because they're so active. We owe Siddhartha an apology, just like we do Jesus, because through the years, his teachings have gotten a little nutty. There have been so many schools of Buddhism, and not all of them make sense. In my earlier days, reading about Buddhism, I thought Buddhism was just this one thing, that there was one kind of Buddhism, and that was it. And it's only now, maybe in the past 20 or 30 years, we've seen all the different schools of Buddhism. They don't agree. They don't necessarily fight, but they do look at each other askew, I'll say that. I had the marvelous opportunity to meet a guy from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. He's a geshe. And geshes go to seminary in Tibet. They don't call it seminary, but it's a school in training, and geshes go there and you get a college education. It's sort of well-rounded, but you learn different things. And he was a contemporary of the Dalai Lama, and he at one time sat on the Tibetan parliament in exile in India. He was a member of their parliament. Well, Andy and I were spending the winter in South Florida one year on this tiny little island and called Pine Island near Fort Myers. You may be familiar with it, but mostly what they're known for is growing mangoes. And it was sort of a farmer's island, but there was one guy that lived there who had met um, the Geshe and had invited him to come from Washington State, where he was a professor and resident at a university. And so he was there and he was gonna, it was in our local little island newspaper that he was gonna give teachings um, every night this week, and anyone was invited. So I went to see him out of curiosity mostly, and I did have this kind of romantic notion about Tibetan Buddhism, and he turned out to be a really, really interesting person. His English was pretty good. He was a happy guy, and he gave us teachings all week long. So at the end of the week, the guy that was hosting this fellow said, well, you know, if you want to, you can take your vows with him. And I hadn't really thought about taking vows. I'd heard of it, people doing it, but I wasn't really, you know, I hadn't been interested until he said that. And I said, well, I don't know, maybe, yeah, maybe, okay, I'll do that. And so my friend Gary, who was the host, he said, well, I've taken my vows, but I'll do them again with you. And I said, okay. So Geshe Pelge, that was his formal name, Geshe Pelge, and that's a title, had the two of us take the vows with him. And so the vows were pretty simple. The basic stuff, if you have read anything about it, it's just that you're not going to kill people. You won't get drunk. You won't you won't tell lies. They're the basic stuff that you grow up learning. That's what he did, only he did it in Tibetan, and I didn't know anything much that he was saying. And every once in a while we were asked to repeat after him, which I did a very poor attempt at. At one point in this ceremony, we had to lie on the floor face down with our arms stretched out and our forehead on the floor. And I was a little, no, more than a little self-conscious about doing that. I was glad that, you know, there weren't a lot of us, but that might have been better, that there were only two of us. And after that, I didn't really have some kind of epiphany or anything, but I felt the solemnity involved in what I had done. And those vows weren't hard for me to really take, because it was all the same things that we've been striving to do and to be since we were children. I had a couple of conversations with him, one-on-one during that time. And I didn't realize how famous he was until after he had gone, and that, you know, he was somebody that it would be a really rare thing for them to have an opportunity to talk to him and meet with him. So a couple of days into this, you know, I asked him a question about something we said 2 days ago. And he remembered the entire conversation. And he remembered everything I had said, and also everything that he had said in reply. And I was shocked because I didn't even remember the things I had said. But he remembered all of it. He learned how to do that when he was in school to be a geshe. They learned how to remember things. And another thing that they learned how to do is to debate without being emotionally involved in your opinion. Now, that's something that's pretty rare indeed, but they're trained in doing that. Also, as part of his training, he spent 5 years at a retreat in a cave in northern India. 5 years. I have trouble doing 5 minutes. I can sit down and meditate, and sometimes it's challenging, most times it's challenging. But he was in meditation for 5 years without seeing anybody. I think people brought him food, but that was it. I can't imagine doing that. So the teachings of Siddhartha are really nothing new. But one of the things, this is what really strikes me, and this is a similarity between Jesus and the Buddha. The night before he was captured and killed, Jesus spent the night praying and meditating. It was pretty critical that that's what he did on his last night. And I think there's nowhere else in the Bible really where meditation is even mentioned. But yet in this, we're told he spent the whole night in prayer and meditation. Well, Siddhartha almost talked about nothing else but meditation in his teachings, because he said, if you want to be able to get rid of these things, your desires, your wanting everything, get rid of your anger, and quit telling yourself crazy stories and believing them, deluding yourself. If you want to do those things, the way to do it is to see how your mind works. And you can do a simple little experiment. Sit down and try meditating. I know some of you in here do that already, and you know how hard it is for your mind not to just go anywhere it wants to. And so one of the first things, the first tools in learning to meditate, according to Siddhartha, was to be able to have focus on just one thing. And they typically use the breath. So there are things we can do. Little tips from the past. When Jesus talks about, if you want to be happy, here's what you need to do. Take care of other people, serve other people. And Buddha was saying, if you want to be happy, get rid of wanting everything, spoiling yourself, get rid of your anger, and get rid of your delusions. So we do have tools that we can use. And the thing is, I'm hardly a good poster board for meditation, but you know what? I keep trying. And every once in a while, I get so much peace from a meditation that it's worth having several bad ones to just get a good one. Now, they tell us not to call them bad or good, the teachers, who teach meditation. They said, don't judge these things as bad or good, but I really can't help it, because when I get a good one, that's what I want all the time. And good, how do I know it's good? Because when I get up, I am peaceful. I feel relaxed. I feel calm. I don't have anger that I can name. I haven't been telling myself crazy stories that I'm going to believe, but I do have that peace that they promise that we will get. And I do know that if we don't have peace within ourselves, we don't really have much of a chance for world peace. We're just all people who don't have any peace within ourselves. If you need more proof of how crazy we are, all you need to look at is the occurrence of road rage these days, and people fighting at school board meetings over really dumb stuff. And people have such a strong attachment to their opinions about this, that they're violent. We're violent. We're them. If you've ever flown off the handle, then you kind of know what that feels like, and it's being temporarily insane. I wish I could say it's never happened to me, but it has. And I got angry and I did things that I'm not proud of. So I think it's an easy enough thing to try meditating if you've never done it before. You don't need special equipment. A lot of people have their favorite cushion that they sit on, but a chair will do. You can even do walking meditations where you don't really need to sit. There are plenty of books on meditation, and there are classes we can go to learn how to meditate. And if you gave it a try at least more than once, sitting down one time and going, oh, well, I didn't get enlightened, so I'm not going to do this anymore. What a waste of time. if you do it a little longer until you get up that one time and you go, I really feel peaceful. I really feel calm inside. I'm nicer today than I was yesterday. And it happens. And then you want that all the time and that kind of blows it away. So you have to just keep coming back for more. And there's never a time when I sat down and go, well, that was just a total waste of time. I wish I hadn't done it. I've never done that. But like I said, I am not the poster board for a meditator. I'm raw, and for the past 2 years, until maybe about 3 months ago, I had to remediate how I meditated. I had to do a different kind, and it was to do a mantra meditation. Before I close, I want to tell you what the mantra was. And if you'd like me to share that with you, I could send it to you via email or something. But I got it for a woman named Teresa Stewart. And she was having a particular rough time in her life coming off of amphetamines, which you might imagine would be kind of tricky. She was going through withdrawal. And so her teacher said, well, here, use this mantra. If your mind is so frantic that you can't really do anything else, repeat this mantra to yourself in your mind. May I be peaceful. May I be contented. May I be free from mental torment, safe from within and without. May I be healthy and strong. May I be at ease in this life. And so I borrowed that from her, and I did that for 2 years in my meditation. And it was probably the most remarkable thing. It was so subtle, I didn't realize what was happening, but it did give me a sense of being on the right path, or at least a part of bringing good into the world, and so I've started talking about that, talking about my experience with that, and how I think that we do have hope in today's world. It's going to always be crazy. There will not be a time when it isn't. But we don't have to have the crazy in our little corner of the world. We can choose something else, but it is up to us. Thank you for having me here today. It's been an absolute pleasure.